Thank you, Robert. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And starting this my presentation after Grace Daly saying she feels embarrassed about what she can tell you and you don't know about. I mean, what can I say? How do I feel about it? Oh my God. This is the challenge. But now. There are two inspirations behind my presentation, which will focus on the role video games could play in like opening, engaging, especially younger generation, into topics of spiritual and existential questions and thoughts and threads in their lives. And there are again two inspirations from here. And one is basically one that is accompanying me throughout the whole project of the faith and the beliefs of unbelievers, and it's a question generally. Yes, what are the specific challenges of digital era that reflect on the way how we as society, and especially the younger generation, how do we engage existential and spiritual topics and religious topics in our lives? And this is something that I believe throughout the project reappeared many times, this question. But I think it's still in need of deeper research and development. That's one of my thoughts here, or initial inspirations for me. And it's basically about like this generation of what an expert on the digital culture from Poland, Magdalena Biga, describes as digital natives, or indigenous people of the digital era, right? These people who are already born and raised from their childhood in digital in digital services, using smartphones as ways of communication, and as Grace Daly put out in her presentation and afterwards in the session, right? They are the ones who even communicate differently. That for them, this digital communication is more natural than, let's say, face-to-face meetings. That's one thing. Number two is specifically Tomasz Halik's chapter 14's confession, and I will read a fragment to you that inspired me for this. Tomasz Halik writes, "It was its aesthetic aspect that first attracted me to the world of religion. For me, the first door to the world of faith was art. The architecture of the old churches of Prague, those treasure troves of works of art and sacred music, those indelible traces of the sacred in the uniform grey of state-imposed primitive materialist ideology. My intellectual initiation into Christianity, which happened only after that emotional enchantment, was not offered by theological books or catechisms, but by literature." And he adds a few sentences actually earlier, "Indeed, literature in particular offers the possibility of participating in the experience of others. Art more than science led me onto the path of never-ending search for truth." And trying to connect the dots between the two inspirations I have here, I wanted to ask, the question that is my main question here is whether video games in a post-secular era could play a role similar to the one literature described, the one literature played in Tomasz Halik's life and confession in his youth. Especially when we think about the fact that this young generation of what I called digital natives is very much as well not vocal about religion. They're simply either they don't know much about religion, they are very often not religious, but they are potentially even completely ignorant of religious topics in their lives. And can video games be this bridge between the two worlds? And second of all, how to study video games in the religious context, and finally, what novel qualities video games bring to the table. And I will use the example of one of the best-selling video games of all time, Red Dead Redemption 2, to build on that. Now, first of all, there is a theoretical framework I would like to refer to. Again, I'm not a theologian, I'm not a digital specialist as well, more than like a practical approach they bring to the table here, because of working in media for a long time. So we'll refer to the work of Frank Bosman, who's a colleague of Peter from the Ministry of Tilburg. Frank Bosman is a specialist on theology and video game studies. He actually published a book called Gaming and the Divine, which presents an idea for a systematic theology of video games. And in short, I will just refer to his work at the beginning, as I think it's a very useful tool for further analysis. Frank Bosman presents two main arguments in his work. One, that video games are genuine relative theological spaces that are the sources of God's self-revelation as Creator, Father, Savior, the Son, and Whole-Maker, Spirit. And this claim of Bosman is based upon a conviction that cultural artifacts generally do have this capacity for being objects of theological study of God's self-revelation. That's kind of one of his assumptions, one of his arguments he made, and I think he's very convincing in that book I told you about that argument. What is important maybe in this context is that Bosman believes that God is often hidden in our today's culture, uses the term Deus incognitus, and the players playing video games can act as those who uncover from the formal layers and maybe very often verbal layers that they don't reflect upon religion, but underneath it there are many spiritual senses that can come to one's attention when playing video games. Second of all, Bosman convinces us that the act of playing particular games can in some specific cases be interpreted as a religious act in itself. I believe he makes a very strong argument for the first case, and for this argument he makes a strong case. So he's still convincing, but maybe there are some places where you could argue with Bosman on that. Either way, Bosman points. The specific point at which video games as religious acts differ from other religious acts lies in the necessary interactive nature of a video game medium. In his or her gaming, the player theologically bears witness to God's self-revelation, presenting God to him or herself and to the world. And because of the time frame, and we don't have very much time here, I won't go throughout many other interesting arguments Bosman makes, but I wanted just to point out that according to Bosman, when we analyze video games and their content, and as the way they are designed as well, it's not only content, he sees references to creational theology, Christology, theological anthropology, theodicy, ethics, phanatology, and finally critique of religion. And these are some of the tropes that we can find in many of the video games that one can play. And now, I told you I wanted to use the example of, one more theoretical important notion here. From a Bosman perspective, what becomes key and fundamental in the post-secular era is cultural theology, because according to him, in a world which is more and more often religiously indifferent, it's especially through culture that people can come across some specific tropes, existential and spiritual threats. And that's why this is his point of interest, and mine to an extent as well. And I wanted to bring to your attention the game Red Dead Redemption 2. This is one of the best-selling video games of all time, as I said. It's debuted in 2018. And I pick it for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's one of the very few AAA games, AAA meaning the games with the biggest budget, with the biggest outreach, that very specifically target some topics of spiritual and religious nature. It's there in the title, Red Dead Redemption, already. The game really asks, in a long process of playing the game, it really asks the player a question, is redemption possible? Especially for a sincere penitent. And I think that's something that is very touching in all the game. And finally, another reason which I picked this game for analysis is the protagonist of the game, Arthur Morgan, the one who the player enacts throughout the game's course. I picked it especially because in reading reviews, video essays or reading essays on the game, both in media and in academic journals, as well as reading comments on social media and YouTube and so on, I've came across so many powerful statements from the players and from the analysts about Arthur Morgan that I realized that people actually do ask very important existential questions based on his story. So Arthur Morgan was dubbed, for example, the greatest fictional character in history, the purest person I've ever met, whose death brought tears to my eyes and made me reflect on my own life. It just carries this powerful notion of reflecting on one's life. And so about the game itself, shortly, Red Dead Redemption 2, from a strictly gaming perspective, is a third-person perspective action video game. And narratively, it represents the genre of anti-Western or revisionist Western, so it takes place in the Old West on the turn of 20th century, when we get to know in fictional United States of America, fictional but at the same time going to grand lengths to present its real life diversity in terms of biology, in terms of geography, and in terms of people who live there. And so it presents this fictional USA in which we as players become Arthur Morgan. By the way, I say become, I associate the player with Arthur Morgan very much because again, that's what's the picture of the comments on the game struck me as, that people do associate themselves with the protagonist of the game. So I use the protagonist and the player as somewhat synonymous in this context. And so Arthur Morgan is a bad guy. He's a gunslinger in a group of outlaws, a gang, who terrorizes some of the western states and southern states of America. And the gang is led by a messiah-like figure of Dutch van der Linde, who promises the gang members, both women, men and children, who promises them that when they make their last final big score, like a big heist, when they get a lot of money, they will quit their criminal past, and once they do it, they will start a new peaceful life, completely cut off from both criminal past, but also from civilization. Because this is also a very common trope here, that civilization is the thing that actually makes the world corrupt and makes us do this evil act as criminals, because of how corrupt the civilization is, we do it. What's important is that throughout the course of the game, which completion takes anywhere from 20 hours at least to hundreds and hundreds of hours of playtime, we get to know other gang members and their background stories. We would traverse various states and even take part in the revolutionary struggle of one of the Caribbean nations against colonial powers. So it brings a lot of content to think about. And so I wonder, how does the game engage the players so deeply that they say they reflect upon their lives, they think about their life choices, and so on and so on. And it's because the game allows us to take part in Arthur's conversion as a character, from a highly sensitive but blindly obedient to the earthly messiah, I told you about the gang leader, to a person who denounces his mentor, his own crimes, and eventually his own life altogether. This is a quality that video games have that is essential, and it's because video games allow players to immerse themselves into the character that they play so much, more than other media do. It's because they use much more senses, right, with visuals, audio, and other stuff, that allows us to really be a part of this transition, be actually an actor and not just a player in this transition. Okay, Harry, so what do we do here? So the game asks us about the question I told you about redemption. Is redemption possible for a criminal? Is redemption possible to us, as players, as people? And is there any redemption there? Seemingly the game gives a negative answer. There is certainly no redemption, not in this world. No one can, and everyone who did crimes, and everyone who did anything wrong in their life, not only crimes, will be eventually caught up by the law system, the law enforcement, but by other people, and they will be put to justice. This is what the game explicitly tells us in many of the scenes, in executions we take part in, seeing sheriffs hanging former criminals who, after 10 years of trying to eradicate their criminal past, are caught and brought to justice and are simply hanged. But as the game goes on, there are two events which change Arthur completely and which open what I would call a window of hope. That redemption maybe is possible. And here is what we are bringing up to a short movie I wanted to Robert to play. So just two more sentences, Robert, before you start that, please. So we accompany Arthur in his, again, change in the way how he becomes a different person. It's not that Arthur suddenly, becomes a devout Christian or a devout religious person. He's still in deep questions about what is the nature of good, of beauty, of love, of selfless deeds, and so on and so on. But eventually, when he meets two persons in the in-game world, they help vocalize his fears about dying and his hope for a better future. And those are Brother Dawkins, a Franciscan brother depicted in the game, and Sister Calderon. And by the end of the game, we eventually have a really confession-like scene where Arthur and Sister Calderon had this conversation that I would like Robert to play to us.
Life is full of pain. There is also love and beauty.
What am I gonna do now?
Be grateful that for the first time you see the light gleaming. Perhaps you could help someone. Helping makes you really happy.
I still don't believe in nothing.
Often neither do I. But then I meet someone like you, and everything makes sense.
You're too smart for me, sister. I guess I'm afraid.
There is nothing to be afraid of, Mr. Warren. Take a gamble that love exists, and do a loving act.
All aboard?
I think
I
that's
shall try.
enough. Thank you. One can see references here to Pascal's wager. One can see references here possibly to the theology of Teresa of Lisieux. One can see references to Tomasz Halik's claim and what he said as well. Even today, in his initial keynote speech about the fact that the continuity of faith and lack of faith is changing in one person's lives, including for this nun that helps Arthur again vocalize many of his fears and hopes as well. And there are many more important spiritual references to, I believe, Saint Paul and his second letter of the Corinthians, in which he writes about the fact that he thinks that the burden that God put on him was too heavy, and he asked God to take off the burden of his shoulders. And that very much, the main protagonist of the game, Arthur Morgan, follows the same footsteps. He changes into a person who tries to repay his debts, who does selfless acts throughout the end of the game, and only if the player chooses to, because again, video games have this unique quality, giving the player the choice, and that's what I believe is again very important in studying video games in the theological perspective, is that they actually do engage choices and important ethical dilemmas. They leave it up to the players to decide how they are going to solve them. But eventually, with Arthur Morgan, it is clear that he basically gives up his life for the others, for the ones he loved. And to close out, because I know my time is already past, so to close out, I would just like to say that I believe in projects like Faith and the Beliefs of Nonbelievers and for the future, it is really worth engaging and asking both theologians studying video games and maybe cultural studies experts to take part in bringing to light those many religious contexts that both in video games and possibly in other types of art can bridge the topics of faith and important existential questions with the younger generation of people. And that would be it for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.